what, in your view, can be done? There's obviously what should be done in a humanitarian sense, but what do you think EU countries can do?
I think they really need to look at the structural causes of migration. I mean, I think this is obviously, in the immediate term, there's a humanitarian emergency, and that requires a massively beefed up rescue operation. It requires a real streamlining of asylum applications, and it requires a much greater degree of compassion from our political leaders than they've shown either to migrants or to our own citizens that they've subjected to austerity. But in the long run, I think you really need to look at the things that Western financial institutions do to cause migration. I'm thinking particularly of the World Bank. The World Bank has displaced 3.4 million people in the last decade, according to an ICIJ report that was published this week. And by putting a lot of money into either very environmentally destructive projects like dams or pipelines, or empowering really dubious political regimes like the Sisi regime in Egypt that's cracking down on Arab Spring dissidents, the financial institutions of the West are really an enormously strong push factor that is making life unsustainable in a lot of poor countries.
And yet it's those financial institutions often, it's often those institutions, isn't it, who are putting in investment to create jobs, only jobs that are going to keep people at home.
Right. I mean, you really need to look at the infrastructure of countries. I think people don't leave generally their own home for a better life. They largely leave for a life. They don't leave the people they love and the world they know unless they're really desperate. And so in somewhere like Libya, for example, which, as you've been showing today, is really the epicenter of, it's a sort of client state for people smugglers now. That country is in the state it's in large part because of Western bombing and a complete failure to reconstruct the infrastructure we destroyed. The Sisi regime in Egypt is something that we've empowered that is privatizing through banks like the EBRD and the EIB. They're putting money in, which is great, but they're putting money into things that really only serve the interests of big corporations and global capital interests, which are massively privatizing and putting people out of work, that are, for example, the EBRD in Egypt is cutting food subsidies. That's the first thing they've done, which means you're putting lots of people on the breadline below the breadline. So if we stopped interfering and intervening in these countries, and by we I really mean our political elite, I don't mean actually ordinary people. I've been very, very impressed by the compassion that ordinary people have started to show towards migrations, or a lot of people have started to show, unlike the sort of Katie Hopkins people of the world are elites.
And
I
yet
think there's a real clash
we know
between
that,
elite and normal people.
Right now, you and I are sitting in a country where there's an election campaign going on, where one of the issues high on the agenda is immigration. And it's high there not because people are saying, I feel terrible about migrants, but because they're worried about migrant numbers coming to the country. So you say political leaders should take responsibility even despite those sort of public concerns, do you think?
I do, because I think the backlash to Katie Hopkins has shown how much a lot of those concerns are whipped up by fairly malicious anti-migrant voices. And just because those voices are loud doesn't mean they're the majority. I think there's an enormous groundswell of compassion for what's happening to people. I also think that in purely, in demographic terms, we are a rapidly aging population. And if we want to maintain our standard of living, we actually have not much choice but to look for a lot of skilled people from abroad. Now, there's a lot of questions about that in terms of the impact on public services, in terms of whose jobs are undermined by that. I'm not saying that migration is an unalloyed good or that it should be uncontrolled. What I'm saying is that we already rely on migration a lot for our economy, and to demonize those people at the exact time that they're drowning is a sort of moral abandonment of our responsibilities, I think. There's a way in which I believe that our financial elite have inflicted austerity on us and have also inflicted austerity on the poor in Africa that really overlaps. And I think that calls for a solidarity between normal
Katie
people.
Hopkins there, just because a lot of our audience globally won't realise that this was about a column that was very anti-migrant and has stirred up a lot of emotion here in Britain. But just briefly, what you're saying also seems to be politicians have a responsibility to change the narrative.
That's exactly what I'm saying, actually. It's very, very easy. It's always easy to play the hate card. To my mind, there's a very clear underscoring of racism in that hate card, in the terms of who's coming over here. But it's very easy to play the lowest common denominator, go away, shut the door. Everyone, the problems you have are caused by outsiders. The problems we have in this country are predominantly caused by our financial elite. the problems that poor migrants have are predominantly caused by our financial elite in league with their financial elite. Now, if we focus on the people who are really responsible for impoverishment here and the impoverishment in the global south, I think that's a lot more humane, a lot more compassionate, and a lot more effective than